Parents and twin sister kicked me out at 16. I lived in a tent and struggled for years. Now I'm a millionaire and they need my help. I was identical twins with my sister, and we used to be closer than anything else in the world. She was my confidante, my partner in crime, and the one person who would always have my back no matter what. For as long as I can remember, that's how things were between us. We didn't have many friends in school because we didn't really need them. We had each other, and that was enough. So we would spend all our free time together, and that was enough to make us both happy. I remember how we would spend hours baking together, with me helping out in the kitchen while she took the lead, coming up with her own recipes and experimenting with different flavors. We would often make a huge mess of things, but even that was somehow fun when we were doing it together. We even had plans of opening our own bakery together once we were old enough. We would imagine what it would look like and what kind of treats we would have in store for all the people who would come to visit us. We even had our future all mapped out. She was going to be the extrovert, outgoing one who would interact with the customers and run everything from the front, while I would be in the background, quietly pulling the strings and making sure everything was running smoothly behind the scenes. I was never much of a talker. She always knew what she wanted and went after it with all her might. I would be content to stay in the background and let her be the shining star. It worked well for us all throughout our school years, and we were both happy with the way things were. But as we got older and started to understand more about the world around us, we began to notice that our parents didn't really have a happy marriage. They had been together since they were teenagers and always told us how lucky they considered themselves. They had known each other for such a long time and had been through so much together that they didn't see how either of them would ever be able to live without the other. Despite all that, we could see that our father was always flirting with other women and barely even trying to conceal his actions, while our mother would just look the other way and pretend like she didn't notice. They hadn't even slept in the same bed in years, so it was pretty clear to both of us that all was not well in paradise. It was hard to watch because initially we used to believe in true love and happily ever afters, but watching our parents, we began to question whether or not such a thing even existed. On top of that, we would also have terrible fights all the time that would shake the walls of our house and rattle the windows, making us feel like it was all about to come crashing down any second. We just had to stay quiet and wait for it to pass. We couldn't shake the feeling that everything was falling apart, and there was nothing that we could do to stop it. Not even being identical twins was going to change the harsh realities we were facing. Thankfully, we still had each other, and that was enough to keep us going. When my sister and I were 13 years old, our parents finally came to the decision that they would be getting a divorce. It wasn't all that surprising, given their constant bickering and lack of affection for one another. One evening, they called us into the living room and sat us down on the couch to break the news to us. It was hard to listen to, even though part of us knew that it was coming. We loved both of our parents very much and couldn't imagine what our lives would be like once they split up. But there was nothing we could do to stop it, so all we could do was sit there with tears streaming down our faces and listen as they told us that they just couldn't be together anymore. Our mother planned on moving to a different city to live with her sister and start over for herself, while our father would continue to live in our hometown. We would be free to choose where we wanted to go, and no matter what decision we made, our parents promised that they would always love us. Our mother asked us to think hard about what we really wanted before we made our final choice, telling us that there was no right or wrong answer in this situation, and we just needed to do what felt right. But no matter what, we would always be able to visit each other and talk to each other as much as we wanted. That knowledge didn't do much to dull the pain that we felt, and we couldn't help but cry for hours we didn't even have the courage to speak to either of them for the rest of the day. We remained curled up on the couch in each other's arms, trying to come to terms with the fact that life as we knew it was about to end. For the first time ever, I felt like I had lost everything that meant anything to me. I wasn't ready to give up on my twin sister, and I was terrified of the thought of being separated from her. The very next day, we talked to our parents and told them that we were going to be staying behind with our father. Our mother was clearly disappointed by our decision, but she accepted it with good grace and hugged us, saying that she would be nearby if we ever needed her, and that was true. Over the next few years, she kept in touch, visiting us as often as she could and calling to talk to us almost every single day. Our father had nothing against her, so he encouraged the relationship, and we were glad for it. It made going through such a difficult time just a little more bearable to know that we still had our mother in our lives. Eventually, she stopped visiting us, and the phone calls became less and less frequent until one day they stopped altogether. We never heard from her again. But we didn't dwell on it because in the end, we had each other. We didn't need anyone else. After our mother moved away and time started ticking on, my sister and I tried to go back to living our lives the way that we had been before. It was hard at first, but we got used to the idea that our parents had separated and would live separately from now on. Being able to see and speak to them whenever we wanted made the situation a little bit easier to deal with. So we would always run to our father every time something went wrong or whenever we got scolded by our teachers at school. He was always more understanding and lenient than our mother, which is not to say that we didn't love her just as much. Eventually, we found a way to lead a life that seemed somewhat normal to the outside world, even though we knew that it would never be the same. But ever since that fallout, things were different between us and our parents. We had never really been able to put the past behind us and move on like everyone else seemed to want us to. Existing in that house was difficult for us, but we just couldn't bear to leave each other's side. As we attempted to cope with the reality of our lives, my sister slowly but surely started to change. Suddenly, we were no longer as important to her as we once were. She started making other friends at school and going out with them, trying to pretend like she was having a good time, even though I could tell that she was just as miserable as I was. She would go out to parties and not bother to invite me, claiming that I wouldn't have any fun since I was so much of a bore. But whenever she would come back home, I would be able to smell the alcohol on her breath, and sometimes I could even see her crying on her bed in the middle of the night, even though she would try to act happy all the time during the day. The mask that she was wearing was slipping, but I was the only one who could see it. Our father was too lost in his own world to notice the impact that our parents' separation was having on his daughters. He spent all his time at work, coming home late at night when we were already in bed, and leaving before we woke up in the morning. So he didn't have any idea about how we were actually doing. Our mother was gone, living in a different state, and we only ever spoke to her on the phone. They were the only family that we had left, and they couldn't be there for us in the way that we needed them to. It became kind of a heavy burden, so I got even more depressed watching her going about her life, pretending to be okay. I hated seeing her suffer, and I knew that she was only doing it so that we could both stay together like we always wanted. But I could also see that it was slowly breaking her heart to stick around even though she really wanted to be with us with her family. So on our 16th birthday, I made the decision that would change everything. I told her that it was time to leave and be with our mother again. I just couldn't stand to watch her pretending to be someone that she was not. It was clear that the circumstances had changed, and it was time for us to change along with it. Our mother had been asking us to leave with her for years, but we had turned her down because we were not ready to give up on our father. That was also our chance to start anew, to begin again from zero, maybe even have a chance at some actual happiness. I couldn't give that up just so I could stay with my father. The truth was that I had resented him for the last 3 years, and I had been hanging on only because I loved my sister and I knew that's what she wanted. But that day changed everything, and I knew that we had to leave if we wanted to have a shot at being happy ever again. My sister was horrified at the very thought of leaving, and she freaked out on me, telling me that I was the only thing holding her back from giving up and running along to our mother. But I insisted that there could be no happiness for either of us without being with our mother. I told her that was the only way we could go back to the lives we always wanted once as little girls. Tears on my face, I pleaded with her to consider coming with me. And at first, she said no and broke my heart in the process. She told me that I was free to leave, but she would be sticking around. She couldn't give up on the man who had helped to raise us. And more than that, she loved him with her whole heart and couldn't abandon him the way that she thought he had abandoned her. There had been a complete breakdown of his mental health ever since our parents filed for divorce, and she couldn't leave him in that state of mind. But he was the world to her, and she would sacrifice anything and everything for his sake. No matter what arguments I presented in favor of our mother, she just shrugged them off and insisted that our place was with our father. As his daughters, we needed to be there for him. We needed to take care of him the way that he had taken care of us since we were born. I tried to tell her that he wasn't paying attention to either of us, so we didn't owe him anything. But she wouldn't be swayed and just kept on insisting that she wasn't going anywhere. I eventually ended up leaving that night while she was asleep since there was no chance of any real discussion. Our father, true to form, was working late that night, and by the time he got home, I was already gone, and so was my sister. We had snuck out of the house in the dead of night, bags slung across our shoulders, and had taken a train to the other side of the country to be with our mother. For the last time in my life, we left behind the people that we loved more than anything else in the world. It was necessary to recognize that we could only truly be happy if we had the courage to finally abandon our father and go to be with the woman who had always seemed like she was more trouble than she was worth. I knew that I had broken my sister's heart, but at that moment, there was nothing that I wouldn't do for my mother. I was determined to be there beside her, and I would do anything to make that happen. Miscellaneous. A few weeks after I left, my sister decided to go back to our father, and like her, he also did nothing to search for me. We did stay connected for some time until he pointed out that if I didn't want to be with him, there was no law that could force him to be with me. And he had a point, so I cut all contacts with everyone I had known before and tried to start a life of my own. Our mother was able to understand my action but never really forgave me for leaving my sister behind. I had expected as much when I made that decision, and I was ready to accept that we would never be able to be close again. It took me a couple of weeks to get a hold of my life and find a job that seemed somewhat stable and I would be content with. But I was living in constant fear that someone I knew would recognize me and try to get in touch with my father to let him know where I was. So I never got too attached to the place that I was living in or the people I was spending my time with, knowing that it was just a matter of time before I would have to leave it all behind. I was always trying my best to save up as much as I could since I knew I would be left to depend only on myself after a certain point in time. I didn't have any friends in New York either. I was too afraid to get attached to anybody, knowing that I would just have to leave them behind and run away all over again. I was living a half-life, and I knew it. But I couldn't bring myself to change it. It seemed almost foolish to dare hope for something more when I had been disappointed so many times before. I don't know how we lost touch, and years went by without me thinking of her or the family that I had left behind. I was finally living a life in New York, a life of my own. It was no fairy tale, but it was enough for me. So I was content for a while until someone found me, that is. On my 26th birthday, I received a call from my sister. I didn't recognize the number, so I picked up thinking it was a telemarketer, and I might as well have some fun with whoever I was talking to. I never expected it to turn out to be my own twin sister, the woman that I hadn't spoken to for almost 10 years. She told me that she was sorry for reaching out to me after so long, but she was in trouble. I was the last person she could think to call for help. I was curious about what was going on since she didn't bother to tell me anything other than the fact that she was in trouble. But when I finally met her, I was horrified by the state that she was in. She had been brutally assaulted and was in need of medical attention that she wasn't willing to seek out. She told me with tears streaming down her face that she trusted me to help her and keep her safe if there was anyone she could rely on. It was her sister. I didn't have to think twice before I decided to get her to a safe place in the hospital and made sure that she was getting the best care possible. Over the next few weeks, she stayed with me as she recovered. We never spoke about what had happened to her after I left, but I could tell that it hadn't been all sunshine and rainbows. She never said anything, but I knew that life hadn't been easy on her. I could raise my head up high and know that I hadn't turned out as miserable as I could have been because I worked hard to find a job. I was no millionaire by any means, but the place that I was living in was mine, and I took pride in that. It was more than I could say for my sister, who was still struggling to get past the childhood that we had been left behind. It's been a few months since my sister is with me, but my question is, how should I move ahead? Because as much as I want to take her in and care for her, I can't help but think of the decisions she made as an adult before this. I am an empath, but I don't know if this is the right decision. What do you think I should do? Try to settle with my sister with the past or move ahead and cut all contacts? She is all the family I have because our mother passed 7 years ago. Can anyone help me with this?